Welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. I'm Howard Schweitzer. Today, my guest for our first live episode of In Conversation With is Annie Duke. Annie is a best-selling author of the book Thinking in Bets and several other books. She is a noted former World Series of Poker champion. She is a business consultant. She's a PhD in cognitive psychology. She is the founder of an organization that helps kids make better decisions. She's had an amazing career and is an amazing thinker around how we make decisions most effectively. I think this will be useful for everybody in life and in business, and I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for tuning in.
We stand today
a date which will live in infamy.
I have a dream.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Annie, thank you so much for being here In Conversation With. It's a true privilege to have you.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I'm excited.
So over the summer, I was at a wedding of a good friend of ours, kid, and this whole friend group of my wife's they all went to Penn together, and we're standing around talking about the various businesses we run and how we make decisions and hiring people. And the fact that when we hire someone, we're effectively making a bet on the people we're bringing into our organizations. And someone turns to me and says, "Have you read this book, Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke?"
Oh.
And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, download it. It's exactly what we're talking about, and I think you'll love it." So I did, and I loved it. And I think it's a phenomenal guide to executives and really everybody making decisions as they deal with their businesses and frankly with their lives. We've had a long-running political podcast. And over the summer, I was thinking about the world, and just to borrow a phrase from your book, I feel some days like the world is a little bit on tilt. And
yeah. I'm going to steal that from you.
there you go.
That's good.
Decided rather than just within our organization talking about politics, we would start to talk to people out in the world who help our clients and our listeners and our friends make sense of the world we're living in. And I immediately thought of you as a great guest.
Well, thank you.
This is our first live In Conversation with an audience, and we're giving away your book today, Thinking in Bets, and sending it out to clients and listeners across the country, and I'm super excited about that. Before we get into Thinking in Bets, I wanted to take a step back with you and talk about your career.
Okay.
You've had such an incredible career. You started out as a grad student, left your grad program right before your dissertation, started playing poker, became a champion poker player. From there, you became a business consultant. You appeared on Celebrity Apprentice. You've written several best-selling books, and you have turned to philanthropy and started an organization to teach kids how to make better decisions. So an incredible career, an incredible path. How much of that has been skilled decision-making by you along the way versus a little bit of luck?
Look, everything is a combination of skill and luck. And here's an example. I actually did finish my PhD in the end, but it took me a long time. I actually finished it a few years ago. So when I left graduate school, I think I'll just look at the sort of two ends of that academic career to sort of say, like, what's skill, what's luck, right? So I actually had done my dissertation work. I was out on the job market. I was ready to defend the dissertation, got sick. That's obviously bad luck. It wasn't something that I caused myself. It just happened. I actually ended up in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And what that meant was that I needed to take some time off and delay going back out on the job market until the next year. None of that was a skill decision. It was just something that happened. In that time, I needed to go make money because when I was out of school, I did not have my National Science Foundation fellowship anymore. And that's when I started playing poker. That's a skill decision. Now, even there, I was really good at it, but it's still like, in some sense, it's luck that I'm good at it, right? So I'm taking something that isn't in my control, which is a talent for that type of problem solving, and then using skill in order to get better at it and actually apply that trade. And so I ended up sort of staying in that. Circle back to many, many years later, and it's the pandemic. And Phil Tetlock and Barb Mellers. Phil Tetlock wrote an amazing book I would highly recommend to everybody called Super Forecasting. And he works on this particular problem of how do we think about becoming better at forecasting events in the future, not just the weather, but like geopolitical events, so on and so forth. And what he and his collaborator and wife, Barb Mellers, have found out is that there are people who are just really talented at it. He calls them super forecasters. But they were actually engaged in partnership with the government, with IARPA, to try to identify how do you train people who are not super forecasters, who are just novices, people like us, at becoming better forecasters, and they were not making a lot of headway. So I've known Phil for a long time. He reached out to me, said, look, you teach this stuff. You were a poker player, which is a forecasting problem. This combination of sort of like super forecaster, which is kind of what a poker player is, and teacher, maybe you could come up with a training for novices. Again, I did not reach out to him. He reached out to me. So we have to put that into the luck category. So then I created a training. We did that with novices who had no forecasting experience. They were forecasting a card game. Got really big results in terms of people who were getting the forecasting training versus people who weren't. Ended up doing 4 studies with them. That turned into a dissertation. It was skill that I was able to create the training. It was skill in the experimental design. It was skill in writing the dissertation. It was obviously a skill decision to decide to turn that into a dissertation. But the initial outreach, the thing that spurred me to come back to it, not in my control. And I think that this is something that's just really important as sort of a concept. As you're thinking about, why did I get the results that I have, is to recognize that kind of like at the base of anything that happens is luck. You're born to certain parents in a certain country at a certain time. I was very lucky to be born at a time when women weren't property in this country, right? Like that made a big difference, right? And so those elements of luck, like how tall are you, right? What are your proclivities, your talents? Where are you born? Determines kind of the range of outcomes that are available to you. And then within that range of outcomes that are available to you, which is determined by luck, the skill part is where do I land in that distribution? Mm-hmm. How do I increase the probability of getting to kind of the better set of outcomes? And I think that that's shown throughout my career in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like luck, which you spend a lot of time on in the book, is such a significant dimension of our lives, but it's also very hard to wrap my mind around. I think it's hard for people to wrap their minds around. How do we do that?
It's incredibly hard. I mean, we can go from, the idea that we all take too much credit for the good things that happen in our lives. And I really try hard not to do that. I really try hard to recognize the things that were very lucky in my life. But even so, I'm still over-rotating on the skill part for good outcomes because, it makes us feel good about ourselves. We have a motivation to advance our self-narrative in a positive way, which is at the base of a lot of the decision errors that we make. And we can sort of take it from that kind of small thing that everybody does all the way to sort of conspiracy theories and conspiratorial thinking, which is honestly just just being uncomfortable with luck. Being uncomfortable with randomness, being uncomfortable with the idea that things just happen in the world. And if you have enough things happening in the world, sometimes they happen together.
Yeah.
For no reason that has anything to do with anything causal, right? But we're so uncomfortable with this idea that taken to its extreme, we start to create these very complicated narratives to sort of take luck out of the equation, to take randomness out of the equation. And that's something that we really need to work hard to avoid, not just in the extreme case, like hopefully we're not conspiracy theorists here, but not just in the extreme case, but also when we're thinking about the outcomes of our everyday decisions. We're just talking about hiring, right?
Yeah.
Why when we hire somebody, do they turn out to be a superstar? Or sometimes they turn out to be someone who's not so good and you sort of regret. And it's going to be about 50-50 on that, by the way. We know that. And when someone's great, are we saying, look at how great I am at hiring? When someone's bad, are we saying like, oh, you're terrible at hiring, right? And we shouldn't be doing that, because we have to recognize that hiring in itself is one of the hardest forecasting problems there is. What do you know about a person when you're hiring them? Like, you have a resume and a few interviews, and you've probably maybe done some referencing, maybe you've talked to some back doors.
Due diligence.
Yeah, you've done some due diligence, you've given them maybe a practicum of some sort, but you haven't had them in seat in the job with your team, so on and so forth, right? It's actually a really hard problem, and it's not surprising that it's such a noisy process, but we don't like the idea that we don't have control over it.
Yeah.
And we have to start to get comfortable at that. Otherwise, as we try to figure out why is it that this person turned out great? Why is it this person didn't? If we take luck out of the equation, we start to mess up the feedback loops that are going to help us to do better in that decision-making problem
that
in the
makes
future.
sense. So this notion of making your own luck, like people say, yeah, you make your own luck, but you don't. Is that just something we say to make ourselves feel more in control?
It's absurdist. It makes as little sense as saying that like prices have come down 700%. It literally just doesn't make any sense. You break the world. So how could you possibly make your own luck? Luck is an exogenous force. It's outside that acts upon us. That's it. It's like, I can't make Vladimir Putin do anything. Whatever he does that has an effect on me is luck from my perspective. It just happens. If a meteor hits the earth, it just happens. I have no control over that. It's luck. I don't have control over when I was born. We can't make luck, because luck is not a force that we have control over, definitionally speaking.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do people mean when they actually say that? And I really wish they would stop saying that. What they say is, going back to what I said about you have some distribution of outcomes that are available to you. What is the skill element? The skill element is changing the probability, like acting in a way that's going to change the probability of certain outcomes occurring. Okay, so when I say, if I were to say, which I never would, I make my own luck, what I would really be saying is, I make decisions that change the probability of my getting good outcomes in a way that is positive. That's what I'm really saying. But even when you do that, let's imagine that with just sort of, if I were allowing the status quo to occur, that the chances that I had something great happen to me were 20%.
Yeah.
And now I make a better decision, and now the chances that something great is going to happen is going to be 35%. That would be a great decision, right? Like, where I'm really moving the needle there from 20 to 35%. But guess what? 65% of the time, I'm going to observe a bad outcome. Just definitionally speaking, right? Like, I have no control over when I'm going to observe that 65%. In the same way, like if I flip a coin, 50% of the time I'm going to get heads, 50% of the time I'm going to get tails. I have no control over which one I'm going to observe on any given time. So I could make the best decision in the world, like just this great decision that's going to get me a good outcome 95% of the time. And guess what? 5% of the time, I'm going to observe a bad outcome. Did I make my luck there? No, like I made a decision that caused the distribution of outcomes to be in a certain way, where then when luck exerts its force, I've reduced the chances that what I observe is a bad outcome. And this is not a distinction without a difference, because when we say we make our own luck, we're saying that we have some sort of control over which outcome we observe in the distribution, and we just don't.
So you talk a lot about separating decision quality from outcomes.
Yes.
Overreading outcomes. You spoke about it a minute ago. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Okay. So we sort of have a twofold problem as decision makers. One of them is what we would call resulting, which is that when we're observing things occurring in the world, we think that bad outcomes are because of bad decisions and good outcomes are because of good decisions when we're observing something in the world. So, for example, I opened Thinking in Bets with Pete Carroll, making a call at the end of the 2015 Super Bowl where it's the Seahawks against the Patriots. Football fans will remember this play. There's 26 seconds left on the clock. He calls for a pass play when people think he should hand the ball off to Marshawn Lynch. That results in an interception, and everybody, literally the headlines the next day, some of them called him an idiot and said it was, I think USA Today said it was the worst play in NFL history. That's a pretty strong claim. I will agree it's one of the worst outcomes in NFL history. But this is a good example of this confusion that we get. Like,
Yep.
we hire someone, they turn out great, and we think, oh, what a great decision to hire them, right? But the thing is that outcomes and decisions aren't linked in that way. So not so tightly. So on average, when you make a good decision, you're more likely to get a good outcome, on average. But that doesn't mean that you will always get a good decision. I assume that some of you have sometimes gone through a green light following all traffic rules and gotten it in some sort of accident. So was it a bad decision to go through the green light? I hope not. I have accidentally run a red light and had nothing bad happen to me. I hope that I don't think that it was a good decision to run the red light. I hope that I still think that that was a bad decision. So this is where we get into this problem when we link these things too tightly. And we think, okay, bad outcome means bad decision, good outcome means good decision, when it doesn't. In the case of Pete Carroll, the chances that that interception occurred were only going to be about 1 to 2%. And he was getting a lot in return for that in terms of an increase in win probability. You can go to my book to get the details, but he was really drastically increasing his win probability. So you observe this very rare event. So here we see this mistake occurring, right? So what we don't want to do is, like, as an example, we have a meeting with someone, we jive with them, they're charismatic, we get along with them well, and we hire them. Now let's call that a bad process. Now, if that person works out really well, if we do make this mistake and we say, good outcome, good decision, what if we think that's a great hiring process now? That all it takes is, I got to jive with them, I need them to be charismatic, I need them to think they're a really good personality fit, and you don't do any of the other stuff. Obviously, that's going to reduce the chances that you get a good outcome in the future. Likewise, if you have someone where you go through all this diligence and you go through a really good process and they don't work out, what if you think, oh, that was a bad decision, and you actually decide that you should just jive with them or something like that, right? You could do the opposite. So that's actually a really big error that we could make. And we don't want to do that because it messes up the way that we close feedback loops. Maybe we stop passing the ball and actually do hand it off to Marshawn Lynch in that situation, which would have been quite a bad decision, as it turns out. So we don't really want to do that. The other thing that I think is really interesting, though, is that there's something called self-serving bias. And this pertains specifically to me and to you and to you and to you and to you as individuals. So when I'm observing something that Pete Carroll does, I do this resulting thing. If the ball is caught for the game-winning touchdown, he's a genius. We can all intuit that. If the ball is intercepted, he's an idiot. Decision was exactly the same, but the outcome is driving the way we interpret it. Okay, but what about me? What about when I win a hand of poker? Well, obviously, I'm a genius. I played it really well. Didn't have anything to do with luck, although it might have. I could have played the hand quite poorly, but I don't even go that deeply to think about it because I just want to take credit for the good outcome, okay? What if I lose a hand of poker? Well, obviously, I got unlucky. So this is called self-serving bias. It's a little bit different, where when we're processing our own outcomes, when something good happens, we're like, I'm great. That was all skill. And when something bad happens, you're like, why do these things always happen to me? I got so unlucky. Now, the problem with either of these issues, right? When I'm seeing other people, I just go good outcome, good decision, bad outcome, bad decision. For myself, good outcome, I'm awesome, bad outcome, I'm unlucky, is that for any decision that we make, we have to think that all 4 of the quadrants can get filled. Good outcome, good decision, good outcome, good decision, bad outcome. That'd be running a green light, right? Bad decision, good outcome. Running a red light, bad decision, bad outcome. All right, so we know that all 4 of those things can occur, and we have to actually start to examine the possibility that all four of those things are occurring. And often it's a little bit of a blend. So I can win a hand of poker, play it pretty well, but also get lucky, right? So that can happen. I could play a hand of poker, play it pretty poorly, but also get unlucky, right?
I
That
don't
could
know
happen.
the other person's cards.
Right. Or I could get lucky. I mean, all of these things are true. And if we don't start examining all four quadrants, the way that we actually learn from experience is going to get distorted. And it's going to cause our future decisions actually to go down in quality rather than up. And experience is the best teacher to help us to become better at decision making, which is why this problem is so important to attack.
And how do we get better at it? You write in the book about your poker group that you would go to as your truth squad, essentially.
Yeah.
And how they kind of programmed out of you, complaining about the result based on luck and kind of refining your thinking. Is that, do we all need a truth squad?
Well, so here's the good news. The problem with poker is that I can't talk about the hand until after I've played it. Because if I talk about it before I play it, then I'm cheating. So we don't want to do that. Okay, so I play the hand, and then at some point in the future, I can come to you, Howard, and I can be like, hey, can I talk to you about this hand I played?
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, then we have to put in some structure to the way that we're talking to each other that allows me to not bias you, allows me to help me to tell the truth. So let's think about a couple things we can do after the fact. Because it's actually a little bit of a harder problem in poker that I can't do some stuff before I make the decision. But after the fact, what can I do? Well, don't just go and complain that I got unlucky, because luck isn't something I can control. So if I'm just going and trying to tell you how unlucky I got, where's the learning in that? There is none.
Yeah.
And the fact is that even on a hand I got might have actually in reality gotten unlucky on, it's still worth it to go through the decision making, because maybe I could have made better decisions during that hand. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be in the situation where I got unlucky, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that could be true there, right? So I need to make a pact with you that if I start talking about bad luck, you're going to ignore me, right? And you're going to be like, okay, but like, let's go through the hand. Like, what happened? Okay, so that's number one, is that we have to agree that luck, if I'm talking about luck, I just want to know, like, what was the influence of luck? And the only way that I'm going to do that is actually to talk about the skill portion, like what were my decisions? And then what's left over is going to be luck, right? But I don't want to just complain about luck. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is really important, and it goes back to why it's a little bit easier if the decision hasn't already occurred, is that it's very helpful if I don't tell you how any of my decisions during the hand. And you can actually put this into practice in real life. So if I'm going to come tell you a hand, the way that somebody naturally would do that would be to say, okay, Howard, okay, so guy raises in front of me. I have ace queen. I re-raised him. He called. The board came ace, 9-3. He checked, I bet. He called. The turn was another 3. He bet, I raised. He re-raised me. And then I called. Turned out he had ace king. What do you think of the way I played the hand? Now, what's the problem with doing that? You already know I got a bad result. What is your mind going to do? It's going to start resulting.
Right. Look for the mistakes.
Look for the mistakes, because I told you it didn't work out well. If I say to you, it turns out he had ace jack, I won the hand, your mind is going to go to this place of like interpreting that hand as my having played it well because I got a good result. So I've now ruined the whole thing, right? I've brought you into my bias. Okay, so how can I fix that? Guy raises in front of me, I have ace queen, what would you do? Now notice, I haven't said what I did. I haven't told you anything about how the hand turned out. So now we have a discuss about that. You'll tell me what you think, and I'll be like, well, what do you think about these alternatives, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then when we're finished with that, I'll say, well, I raised, and he called. Board came ace, 9-3, he checked, what would you do? Okay, so that's the way to solve it in poker. But there's a much better way to solve it in real decision making. So let's imagine that we have a strategic decision that we have to make. We have a team. What do we do when we have strategic decisions that we make as a team? Well, we basically do the thing that I would naturally do as a poker player if I weren't thinking about it, which is we all come together as a group and we all start talking, right? Like you guys have done brainstorms before, right? Like, what are you doing? Maybe you get a whiteboard and people are calling out things and you're putting them up on the whiteboard, or you're just talking about things and everybody's talking at the same time. Well, now you've ruined it, because everybody's biasing everybody else, because you're just having a talk where everybody can hear everybody's thoughts, right? And remember, in poker, I'm trying for you not to know my thoughts, right? That's really important. That's why I'm speaking to you this way. So what's a better way to do it? This is one of the most important decision-making tools, and it solves pretty much any problem that you have as a decision maker all at once. And it's putting into to your decision-making the concept of what we would call a nominal group. So what's a nominal group? Okay, we're all a group here in this room right now. All right, but what if we're acting as a nominal group? That means we're all at some moment in time acting independently and asynchronously of each other. So let me give you an example from a team that I work with. So I'm a special partner at First Round Capital Partner. We invest at seed. So before I came along 7 years ago and was working with them, the way that their partner meetings would work is a founder would come in, there'd be a deck. The deck would have all sorts of opinions of point partner. That doesn't happen anymore. So the deck wouldn't just be like just the facts, ma'am, like Dragnet. It would be, here's what the market looks like, and this is why I think it's awesome. Okay, so we stripped that stuff out. So now this is the way that it would work. Founder would come in and pitch, there'd be a partner meeting, founder would leave, everybody would start talking and offering opinions. And then they would vote yes or no. The way it works now is founder comes in and pitches. That looks normal. Founder leaves, nobody talks. Everybody goes to an online forum. That online forum has a structured rubric for decisions that each individual partner now needs to give on the investment opportunity. Things like, on a scale of 1 to 7, what's the quality of the market? On a scale of 1 to 7, how good is this founder? How crowded is the competitive landscape? So on and so forth. Now notice I'm saying on a scale of 1 to 7 because we're quantifying those qualitative opinions. That becomes important. And then for anything they say, like, I think the market is a 6, they get 3 to 5 sentences of a rationale. Here's why I think the market is a 6. So they're doing this. Notice they're not talking to each other. They're on an online forum and nobody can see what anybody else is saying. Then they make a few forecasts, right? What's the probability we think this will fund at the next round, for example? They do some pre-mortems. Let's imagine in a year we regret this investment. Why do we think that happened? But we're collecting a whole bunch of different judgments. It takes them about 20 minutes to fill it out. That all dumps into a spreadsheet. We have an LLM that runs over it and says, here are the places of the most disagreement. That's important because most in-person meetings are 80% on double clicking. Hey, what Howard just said, and I'm going to repeat it. So the LLM is pointing the facilitator to dig into the areas where people disagree with each other. And that's where the conversation goes. Why is that so important? I don't know that I'm disagreeing with you. So you're giving your opinion, I'm giving my opinion. We may disagree with each other, but we don't know that when we're writing it down. What that means is that we're not biasing each other. I'm not hearing, well, Howard thinks this, and he's a pretty smart guy. And also I don't want to be embarrassed because he's senior. And so I'm not actually going to say what I really think. I'm no longer allowed to do that. That's number one. So we're getting a much purer view of what people's opinions are. We've also decided in advance what's important to us in this decision so that we can't highlight and lowlight different parts of the narrative to fit with what we want to be true. We're recording it, which creates accountability. And when you know that you're going to be accountable to your decision in the future, it debiases you and pulls you into a place that's more accurate. And then this is really important. Now, whether the investment turns out good or bad, we can go back and look at what we were thinking at the time. And that allows us to disentangle that luck from skill, right? Did we understand that if this didn't work out, this would be why? Because if that's true, then it just didn't work out. It's fine. We made a skillful decision that incorporated that into our thoughts. And across many, many different decisions, we can say on average, when we rate things higher, are they more likely to work out? When we rate things lower, are they less likely to work out? And now we get out of that resulting problem. So if you want to kind of solve everything at once, this concept of a nominal group is like an all-purpose solution to many of your issues.
So let's go back to the hiring context.
Yeah.
How would that kind of a process play itself? How could it play itself out in the hiring context?
So love this in the hiring context. So let's imagine that we are going to have an open role. And we could think about a role that you're going to hire for repeatedly. So the first thing that you would do is people whose opinions matter. So those might be people within function. Let's imagine that you're hiring somebody in leadership, right? So it would be people within function and then also people who are going to be in leadership that person's going to be interacting with. I would send out to them individually, write a job description, explain to a recruiter what this person would look like. And then probably it's usually good to do a mini SWOT. Like what are the near-term opportunities this person will create? What are the near-term challenges this person is going to have to tackle? What are the far-term, long-term challenges? What are the long-term opportunities, internal and externally facing? Okay, so you just have people do that kind of free-form writing. You can then basically create a rubric out of that. So now you can create a job description out of what they've written. You can create sort of what would you say to a recruiter about the person. And then this kind of like, what are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What are the qualities of this person? What's going to be externally facing, internally facing? You can now create a rubric, which are things like, good cultural fit for the executive team. Let's imagine that they're a software engineer, on a scale of 1 to 7, how strong are their coding skills? So on and so forth, right? So we would figure out what those things are, create a rubric. Now you've got that for all time because it's a repeated role. For a one-time role, something like hiring a CFO, which you're not going to do over and over again, you would do it the one time. So now when people interview, they know that the rubric is there first. You can create structured questions that will allow you to actually be better at filling out this rubric. And then whenever anybody's done interviewing, they fill this rubric out. When you get to hiring committee, they've filled that out individually. You drive conversation around the differences. That's now recorded. And then people will vote in private, please, not publicly. I have done this before. So as an example, back to first round, they were hiring a partner. We created a rubric. They came to me and said, this hiring rubric seems kind of long. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. Do you want your partner to be with you for a long time? So because it's actually a very big role. Now, when I'm talking about this much process, I would like this to be for roles that have very big long-term impact that are much harder and costlier to reverse. If you're hiring an intern, I am begging you not to create a decision rubric, not to use nominal groups. I'm begging you to not do that because I know that all of you have some basket of interns that you look at and you spend a lot of time trying to decide among them. I know that's true. Stop doing that. You should have, for that type of thing, you would just have a checklist, which is just a simplified version of a rubric. References are reasonable. GPA is where you want it to be. Experience is great.
Spend more time on the higher value problems.
So when you're hiring an intern, there may be 15 applicants that satisfy your little checklist. That's great. Put those names in a hat, pull it out. I know that feels like a little like, wait, but if they don't work out, I pulled them out of a hat. It's not going to improve your chances to not pull them out of a hat because it's so easy to reverse that decision and it just doesn't have a lot of impact on your bottom line in the long run. I really don't want you to spend your decision-making time on something like that. But if you're hiring a CFO, you should go through all of this process.
Yeah. So in the leadership context, I think one thing that I find that leaders struggle with is balancing projecting strength and kind of decisiveness with being open to asking hard questions and receiving hard feedback. Certainly something I try to do is encourage the truth to power speech. I don't want people to just tell me what they think I want to hear. I want them to tell me what they think.
Yeah.
how do leaders do that effectively, kind of balance that projection of strength with an openness to being told they're not necessarily thinking about things the right way?
So I think that there's always a competition between our present self and our future self. And big competition, right? So many of you, I'm sure, have goals to, increase your health span. But man, when there's a cupcake in front of you, good luck with that. And that's like the classic competition between present and future self. Future self would prefer you did not eat the cupcake. Present self really would prefer that you did eat the cupcake. Okay, so now we've got a little bit of a conflict. When we're thinking about projecting strength, a lot of that is actually the competition between future and present self. We know that for future self, it's better not to have yes men around you or to actually demand that they be yes people. Okay, we don't want yes people around us for future self, because having someone have the ability to speak up and tell you, look, I have a different way to think about this. I think that you're looking at this from the wrong angle is obviously better for you in the long run, but it's painful for you in the short run. Okay. So we have to figure out, how do we balance out long run us against short run us? Well, if you use a nominal group, problem solved, because they don't know they're disagreeing with you. So as a leader, if I really want to project strength actually means being open to hearing what other people have to say. And when you use a nominal group, you solve all of that kind of psychological friction for that. Because not only for you do you get people's actual opinions without them knowing that they're saying to you, oh, you're wrong. But on top of that, they learn that they disagree with other people on the team. And so now what you've done is you said, look, we're normalizing the idea that there's a whole decision map occurring. There's like a lot of different opinions on this team, and isn't that amazing? And we're going to explore them. If I'm running a conversation as a leader, I actually don't even offer my opinion up. So because if I'm the single decider, then I just want to know what everybody else thinks. And when I facilitate a conversation, when I'm doing this, so I teach a class on Maven. My next class is actually in January. I'll send you a discount code. We do a practice conversation like this. And at the end of that conversation, I always say this to them. Does anybody know what my opinion is? And everybody says, oh, no. So when I'm in a leadership role and I'm going to be the single decider, people don't actually know what my opinion is, which is actually the best way to do it. Doesn't that solve the problem? Because now you actually know what the people on your team think. You've gotten the best feedback possible. They don't feel like they're attacking you, which is hard for people who are junior sometimes. You don't feel like you're being attacked, which is hard for anybody, even though you're not being attacked by people's opinions. They're just their opinions. But it takes that problem out of it.
Yeah.
And then you can go off and decide with the most information possible.
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. You've devoted a lot of time recently to the Alliance for Decision Education and educating kids on decision making. I think one of the things that occurred to me when I was prepping for this podcast is little kids, young kids speak their mind.
They do.
There's this saying, from the mouths of babes. They speak truth. When they're really little, they just say stuff. There's nothing holding them back from speaking their minds. What happens to us as we age that results in less of a willingness to do so sometimes? And is your organization, what are you trying to do with kids? Are you trying to kind of catch those impulses early and keep kids kind of in that truth-speaking mode, or is it something else?
So that's just it's just developmental. Like we develop a stronger, if you want to just use a Freudian term, super ego, right? Like this idea of our narrative and how do people think about us and so on and so forth. That's something that develops as we become more aware that there are other people in the world. So really young kids are narcissists by nature, not in the bad sense of the world, but there's actually an interesting developmental thing that happens with kids where if you show them a scene where there's like a mountain and then you can 360 around the base of the mountain, and you place a doll they get to walk around it. You place a doll on the opposite side of the mountain from the kid. When really little kids, when you say to them, what does the doll see? They describe what they see. And there's a developmental milestone when they actually describe what the doll sees. And that just has to do with like, they just see the world through their own eyes. And so when they're speaking, they're not even recognizing like, so that develops, right?
Yeah.
And as that develops, so does this idea of our self-narrative and how do other people think about us and so on and so forth. What we're trying to do at the Alliance for Decision Education is actually going back to the original part of this conversation, like what we started with, which is there's only two things that determine how your life turns out. Luck, that's number one. Don't have any control over that. And skill, which is the quality of the decisions that you make. And we do just a terrible job of teaching kids anything about decision making. Did any of you, when you were in school, maybe in college as an elective, but did any of you take get specific instruction on what's a decision? How do you construct it? How do you think about what the different outcomes are that might occur from your decisions? What's the probability of those things occurring? What could you do to change those probabilities? Anything about the structure? No, you learn trigonometry. You're all using trigonometry today, right? Like every day in your everyday life. What you didn't learn, unless you took it as an elective, was statistics and probability, which is a shame because you use that every single day. Because that is the basis of every decision that you ever make. It's a probabilistic problem. We don't teach that. Why do we teach trigonometry? Well, because we're based on the British system where there was an empire and everybody had to sail. No, for real. But I don't think anybody's sailing by sextant anymore. And so you do, right? If you need to raise a barn, it's helpful. It used to be anyway. So if you're Amish, go for it. Go learn trigonometry. That'd be super helpful. Now, if you become a structural engineer, go take trigonometry as the elective, but we should be teaching this kind of stuff earlier. So what do we teach the youngest kids? Things like agency. You're an agent of your own decisions. Things like, if you do this, then what do you think will happen? So you can teach that to very young kids. Once we get to middle school, we actually start teaching them forecasting. Because at the core of every single decision that you make is a forecast. If I do this thing, then I think these things might happen. If I do this thing, then these things might happen. If I do this thing, then these things might happen. It's all prediction. If I take this route to work, I'll get there on time. If I take this route to work, it will be more scenic, but I'm going to risk 10 minutes more on the road. I got to get to the airport by this particular time, right? These are all predictions that we're making. Who you marry is a prediction. And we start teaching that as early as middle school. The great thing with decision education is that you don't need to teach it as a separate class. Let's think about teaching Macbeth through a decision making, adding some decision making in there. What were Macbeth's decisions? What were his alternatives? What did the counterfactual worlds look like? What about Lady Macbeth's decisions, right? How are they thinking as a group decision making problem, because they're a pair, what they wanted for the future? History, how did Eisenhower manage the European theater of operations? What if they had made different decisions? How might those have turned out? You can teach the water cycle. What if we put a mountain here? What do you think would happen? And so you can actually lay this into any piece of curricula, whether it's kindergartners reading, Spot and Jane, or whether it's a high schooler who is reading Macbeth. You can start to embed this into all the curriculum. And we think it's actually the most important skill, particularly in today's media environment, online environment, to allow people to be able to understand, how do I make a decision? How do I figure out what's true? How do I apply that knowledge to making better forecasts?
Yeah, on that point, kind of the world we're dealing with and social media, I feel like we're bombarded day in and day out, basically with our own BS. Like,
Yeah.
we're just surrounded with what we want to hear.
Yes.
And what we want to see and what we think about the world and
or what the algorithm knows we want to say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how do you cope with that? How do we cope with that?
Well, so I'm actually, first of all, I'm a big fan of the no phones in school and all of that stuff. I think it's really good to talk to other human beings. And I think phones stop you from doing that. So actually, the topic of my next book is how do we deal with the information environment that we live in? So people talk a lot about misinformation. There's work by Duncan Watts, who's actually at UPenn, that shows that misinformation versus what we might call misleading information, which is different. It's about 41-1 misleading to misinformation. Misinformation is not actually that big a problem. Let's call misinformation, I'm just lying. right? I say, only 3,000 Ukrainians have died in the war, right? Like, obviously, that's just a lie. Okay, so that would be what we would call misinformation, is things that are a lie that you can go and fact check. Not that big a problem. What's a bigger problem is information that is being misinterpreted incorrectly. The reason why that's a huge problem is that I can go fact check it and it's going to survive a fact check. So I'll give you an example actually from 2022 in the Washington Post. The title of this particular article was "COVID is no longer a pandemic of the unvaccinated." I was really interested in that because in 2022, the Washington Post at that time would have had a pro-vaccine bias. So I thought, wow, this must be some interesting data. So I read the article and it said in August of 2022, this is according to our own CDC, 58% of the people who died of COVID were vaccinated. So it's a very good example of the kind of thing I'm trying to tackle in this book. Go fact check that. It is true. So now this is where we get into trouble. But is the interpretation true? That is interesting. This journalist was not trying to lie to anybody. This was a weird interpretation of the information. So I looked at that and I said, well, okay, but like what percentage of the population is vaccinated? That was the question that came to my mind, not in the article. So I had to go look it up. 80% of the population was vaccinated. So immediately I said, well, wait, if only 58% of the people who died were vaccinated, 80% were, well, that seems like it's bad to be not vaccinated. But I said, but even so, you should really age match, right? Because we know that 70-year-olds are both more likely to be vaccinated, more likely to die than 20-year-olds. So once you age match for that month, it was 5 times better to be vaccinated than unvaccinated. Now, I want to be clear, people should make their own decisions about whether they want to get vaccinated or not. It's your body. Do what you want with it. But I want you to interpret the data correctly to inform that decision. And as long as you understand, okay, like 5 times better, a lot of that's coming from being older. I'm 25 and you make a decision that you won't, you be you. If you make a decision at 70, you don't want to get vaccinated, you be you. I just want the information that you're using as an input into that decision to be accurate. Now, why I'm saying this is that they were not, that reporter was not lying. That was just their interpretation. And because they did not understand the types of questions that you're supposed to ask of that data, they got the interpretation wrong. There's also a lot of motivation in the media because of clicking that people are unaware of, that's sort of happening under the surface, that makes them want to have sort of the juiciest, most interesting interpretation. But here's where it gets really interesting. With my clients, they're generating all the data all the time where they're making these exact same mistakes. They're not trying to get clicks from anyone. They're trying to get it right because they're making like investment decisions based on their interpretation of data, and they're getting it wrong. I say they're impaling themselves on the data, and I'm trying to sort of stop them from doing that. So the book really has 4 big ideas. Always ask out of how many, right? Like if someone tells you 6,000 people did something, okay, but out of how many? It's really different if it's 6,000 out of 12,000 or 6,000 out of 10 million. Okay, like that's a big difference. So always ask out of how many. You can't understand risk without it. Okay, so that's like if someone says this many people got murdered in this city versus this many people in another city, I need to know how many people lived in each city, right? Out of how many? Compared to what? You have to compare things to something else, right? So that's a really important one. What else happened, right? If someone says, ooh, I made 7% in the stock market this year, I need to know, did the stock market go up that year? By how much versus did it go down? Otherwise, I don't know if you did any good. You might have done bad, right? Like that's the thing. So what else happened? And then also like, is it a sample size of 1 or 10 or 1 million? Is it biased? Is it, just where are you getting this data from? And it's just building out these ideas through narrative to help people navigate this information environment that we're living in. And I really felt compelled to write it because of that Washington Post article. And I said, oh my gosh,
Wow.
like this person's trying to tell the truth, and this is a problem. So forget misinformation. People are very often really, really honestly trying to tell you the truth. And the thing is, It's your problem. You have to look at the data and you have to know how to interpret it, particularly in a media environment that's serving you up what you want to be true.
Think about the world more skeptically, a little bit more
Exactly.
skeptic.
And you can literally just create a checklist. And that's what, with my clients, when they show me data, I just have a checklist and they go, wait, how'd you figure that out so fast? And I'm like, I have a checklist.
So they're going to make us wrap, even though I have 1,000 more questions for you.
I'm
But
sorry.
No. But as we finish up, I mean, a lot of this is about risk taking and managing risk in your life and thinking through the different ways things can go. If you learn to be a better decision maker, can you learn to be more of a risk taker?
Well, what I would say is, I wouldn't say you would learn to be more of a risk taker. I would say you would learn to be better at managing risk. So the reason why I don't say I just want you to be a risk taker, sometimes it's not correct to be a risk taker, right? It's about how are you actually approaching risk as a decision-making problem? Do you understand when it's fine to take on a lot of risk? When is it not okay to take on a lot of risk? Here's a very simple example. If I'm managing my money and I'm 25, I ought to take on a lot more risk than if I'm managing my money and I'm 80. So I don't want an 80-year-old to be particularly risky, right, with their money versus a 25-year-old. Here's another super simple example. When you go on vacation, let's say you go on vacation for 7 days, the first 6 days you try new restaurants. That's actually risky, right? Because it's more unknown. You're more likely to have a bad outcome if you've never been to a restaurant. But when it's your last day and you're never going to be there again, it's probably better to go back to your best one. So I want you to lower your risk in that situation. So what being a good decision maker does is allow you to be a really good risk manager.
Okay.
Because people naturally will often take too little risk in certain situations and take too much risk in another situation. So I want you to get better about what your risk attitudes are and how you manage risk.
Think about it a different way.
Right, exactly. And I think one of the things that allows you to do that is to stop resulting. Because a lot of what causes us to be afraid of risk is this idea like, I don't want to get a bad outcome, right? When we think about something like prospect theory, which comes from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, it's the idea that we choose options that carry a lower absolute loss that are associated with them, sort of ignoring probability and what we would call expected value. How much do you expect to win or lose over the long run? But when you actually are a really good decision maker, you're taking that into account. You're saying, yeah, there's an 80% chance I get a bad outcome, but the payoff is big enough to make it worth me trying this. There's a 5% chance I get a bad outcome, but the payoff doesn't actually pay me for that, so I ought not to do this thing. And it allows you to think about the world in a different way where you're taking into account the possibility of bad outcomes in advance. And that allows you to sort of pre-process and not have that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in a postmortem and everybody's going to be asking me to defend myself, which is going to cause me to be risk averse. And instead, for you to be much better at managing, this is a time when taking on this much risk makes sense. This is a time when it doesn't.
Got it. Well, Annie Duke, thank you so much for coming on with me today, for joining in conversation with. You've given us a tremendous amount of food for thought. I think life skills, business skills, things we can carry into every day and every decision we make. As I said, I loved reading your book and I'm super excited to send it out to folks across the country and look forward to your next one.
I just want to mention this one thing. Over the past little bit, one of the most common questions that I get is, how do we make decisions in this environment? It's so uncertain. And I think this goes back to this risk question and your beautiful summary that you just gave, which is the world is always uncertain. Sometimes you just can't ignore it. And in times of uncertainty, what very often happens is that people become paralyzed and they say, well, I can't make any decisions right now because the world is too uncertain. So the thought that I want to leave you with is, well, not making a decision is a decision. If I'm on a road and I can exit and I don't, which would be not making a decision, you have made a decision not to exit. So first of all, get that idea out of your head that somehow you cannot make decisions and handle the uncertainty, because sticking with the status quo is actually making a decision. That's number one. Number two is when you start to think the way that we've been talking about, uncertainty becomes a really big advantage. It's really easy to make decisions it's not really easy. It's easier to make decisions in more certain environments than it is in uncertain environments. So if you can embrace this way of thinking and improve your decision quality, making decisions in uncertain environments becomes a big competitive advantage, because that's where the skill differential is going to show itself the most. So lean into the environment. Lean into the uncertainty that's occurring right now, and you be the one who's willing to make decisions. So you're going to do better.
Wonderful. Wonderful way to end, and thank you again for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's edition of the Beltway Briefing. If you enjoyed the conversation, the best way to support the podcast is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more information on Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies, visit our website at copublicstrategies.com and follow us on social media. Thanks again for listening.